we knew yesterday that the DOJ was going to be making some sort of an announcement about Russian influence in this election. And we talked about that. We talked about how Russia has been a stalking horse for Democrats for some time when it comes to this is why we lost the 2016 election. And this is what Trump did in order to get ahead. And Russia, Russia, Russia. And indeed, they do love to wave this flag as an excuse for virtually everything. Well, the DOJ, we knew, was coming out yesterday with a major announcement. And when we closed the show yesterday, we said, we'll cover it for you. And our guest tomorrow will be Dave Rubin. Well, imagine our surprise when later that day, the DOJ announced that its case is not against Dave Rubin. Maybe I need to be perfectly clear about that, nor is he accused of doing anything criminal or wrong. He, in fact, is one of the victims of this scheme that the DOJ alleged in great detail yesterday. He, Tim Pool, Benny Johnson, and other conservative media personalities you likely know well. They've all been swept up in this Department of Justice indictment announced last night, not against them, but against two Russians, a male and a female, for their involvement in creating an independent media company that used the podcast feeds and services of these big names in order to amplify their own channel called Tenet Media. And the whole thing turned out to be covertly funded by Russian media organization RT, so alleges the Department of Justice. It's a complicated case that is unsurprisingly not being covered honestly so far by the corporate press, but I'm just going to lay it out for you quickly, relatively quickly. Okay, so here's the deal. The DOJ is alleging that these two Russians who worked for RT, I mean, that does matter, but it's really the fact that they're in Russia and they're Russian and they're pushing Russian interests. What they did was they called their friend Lauren Chen. Now, she is a Canadian citizen who's living and working in America, I believe living here too, but definitely working in America for, among others, The Blaze. And she's a relatively well-known conservative personality online. I will say she's a troll. I unfollowed her a while ago because it was obvious this is not a person worth listening to on X. So they contacted Lauren Chen because, unbeknownst to me, she had worked for RT for a year as a commentator, apparently on the air, but at least writing articles for them. So openly affiliating with this channel. Now, it's not that RT, it's definitely state-run media. It is with Russia. I mean, good luck finding them doing anything critical of Vladimir Putin. Trust me. They try to get more and more influence in the United States. They've had people reach out to me many times to try to get me to do something. It's a no. Okay, they know that by this point. But in this case, they did reach out to Lauren, according to this indictment, and said, help us form a new independent media company and help us find influencers who will work for it. And according to the indictment, she did. She and her husband both did that and recruited guys like Dave and Tim Pool and Benny and three others I never heard of. And she, according to the indictment, knew that the Russians would be funding this and editing content, but the influencers, the conservative podcasters, did not. And that's according to the indictment. That's why none of them has been indicted. The feds are saying Rubin, Pool, Benny, they didn't know. They were not told. In fact, they were given misinformation by Lauren because they allege she knew they would never do this if they understood it was being funded by the Russians. She told them that it was all being funded by some French businessman, Edouard Grigorian. And the indictment alleges that both Tim and Dave, I don't know about the others, tried to kick the tires a bit, obviously not enough, on who this is. Who's Edouard Grigorian? And they wanted to see like a profile of the guy. All that was forwarded was a LinkedIn, which appears obviously to have been fake. And then Dave Rubin is, according to the indictment, the guy who pushed more and said, like, this isn't enough. And then they created this whole fake profile of this guy, Edouard Grigorian, that's like pretty fancy. I'm holding it up for the listening audience, and you can see, frankly, it looks a little obviously stock picture at the top of some vaguely attractive man looking out a window of a private jet. And then it's got all sorts of fawning descriptions about the guy. And Dave apparently did push back even after that, saying, I'm not sure about this guy. It says he's into social justice. Why is he looking for me? Anyway, there was some pushback. But here's the bottom line. They were offering eye-popping sums to these influencers, and they took the deal. According to the indictment, Dave was offered some number, and he went back and said, I'm not getting involved with this. And he didn't do anything really extraordinary for them. He was doing something like viral videos. And aren't they funny? Ha ha ha. For a few months. But for that, they were willing to pay him $400,000 a month, every month for a year, plus a signing bonus, plus another bonus. So we're talking about, between $5 and $6 million for 1 year. And Tim Pool reportedly, well, according to the indictment, was charging $100,000 per video per week. He would post something, I guess, once a week, which would be in the similar ballpark. Now, I will tell you, in the podcast world, those are jaw-dropping sums. And I'm sure people will make the argument they should have known. My friend Jim Garrett, he's making that argument right now over at National Review, and others will make that same argument. But I can tell you personally that I've known Dave for a long time, and there is zero chance that he knew anything about this. We had a conversation a year ago, he and I can disclose this, in which he mentioned this in passing. This wasn't like our main point, but he mentioned this. And he told me, I said, who's funding this? And he said, it's a French businessman. And Dave would have no reason to lie to me that he said that explicitly. And not for nothing, but the conversation went on. And I will tell you that I told him not to do it. And that was not necessarily because I knew anything about the funding. We didn't get into that more than him saying it was his French guy. But I don't have good feelings about this Lauren Chen. And I was right. And I'm sorry that Dave got swept up in this. And I'm sorry Tim did. I don't know Benny, but, I do think these guys are right that they were the victims in this scheme. And sure, you can say they should have known. I get it. But you guys know I did that fraud series over my June vacation. And I, too, was almost defrauded. It was a totally different scheme. It was like some guy trying to convince us that my mother-in-law, trying to convince her that her daughter had been in a car accident and pay money and all that. You should check the episode out. It's actually really good. But I understand it's very easy with 2020 hindsight to say they should have known. Anyway, the question now is, what does this indictment mean? Because they claim that there's a wider reach than just this podcast network. And they also don't say that Lauren and her husband, Liam Donovan, not to be confused with the Liam Donovan who's very prolific on Twitter, who's all out there saying that it's not me, it's different Liam Donovan. What about them? They are not indicted per this document, though that doesn't mean it hasn't happened in secret and that they've potentially turned against these two Russians and are cooperating with them. But I will tell you, when you read this indictment, for sure these two Russians seem like the villains, and Lauren and her husband do not come off much better. We'll see what their defense is. So far, they've said nothing, and I'll get more into detail on what the podcasters are saying in their own defense. Did you know there's nearly $1 trillion of infrastructure and pandemic funds yet to be spent? That's right, there's a massive amount of money that the lame duck administration is pushing hard to spend in their last few months. If the president is able to push these funds out, we could see another prolonged inflation surge just like during COVID. But there's hope. A gold IRA from Birch Gold Group can be an inflation hedge for your savings in uncertain times. To see how to protect your IRA or 401k, get your free info kit on gold by texting MK to 989898. Birch Gold makes it seamless to roll over your retirement account while preserving your tax-advantaged status. Don't wait for the president's spending spree to potentially tank the dollar further. Protect your financial future now. Text MK to get more info. And text my initials to the number 989898. That will bring you your free info kit from Birch Gold. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.